Okay. Uh, so let's start our virtual CME. So the last 18 months has been quite challenging for all of us. And I think slowly from the physical CME, we were all doing a lot of physical CMEs and we have moved into the virtual front, be it schools, colleges, IT industry. We've all moved into the virtual front, virtual learning. And it's been difficult to connect with all our fellow physicians and the primary care physicians, gynecologists, and surgeons. So we thought it would be a good idea to connect with all of you on the virtual platform. So hence we decided to go ahead with this virtual CME. So I am Dr. Vishwanath. I'm a medical oncologist with Apollo Hospitals, Bangalore. I had the pleasure of moderating with my expert panel. So we're just going to discuss a few cases, simple cases, which commonly we encounter in practice. And we will start off with a case on breast cancer. So we have our expert panelist, Dr. Jayanti Tumsi, who is a senior surgical breast oncologist at Apollo Hospitals, Bannerghatta Road. And we also have Dr. Vijay Bhaskar, who is a senior radiation oncologist at Apollo Hospitals, Bannerghatta Road. Welcome, Dr. Jayanti and Dr. Vijay Bhaskar.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And hello, everybody. Thank you.
So let's start with this case. So we have this 37-year-old, this is actually a case which we treated in our hospital. So this is a 37-year-old premenopausal lady. She presented with a right breast lump. And she has family history of breast cancer. Her sister basically has breast cancer. And on examination, we found that there was a 2 into 2 centimeter lump in the upper outer quadrant of the right breast. And there were no palpable axillary lymph nodes or any other lymph nodes palpable. So I would start with Dr. Jayanti. So here we have a premenopausal lady with a breast lump. How would you evaluate this patient?
Right. So a detailed history taking is of course important, and any issues in the breast, what is need to be understood is that we need to do what is called as triple assessment. Now, triple assessment includes a detailed history taking and a physical examination. Second is radiological imaging, and third is pathological diagnosis. So on examination and on history taking, 37-year-old, very often we might not think that it could be a cancerous lump, but we should remember that in India, about 48% of patients are young who are less than 50 years of age. So even in premenopausal age group, we need to have this suspicion, clinical suspicion, and hence triple assessment is extremely important. Now, on examination, this patient had, like you said, a lump. So she would the ideal investigation for her would be ultrasound and mammogram, but mammogram very often in young patients may not be insufficient because young women tend to have dense breast and diagnosing on mammogram may be difficult. But as a first line, we do mammogram and ultrasound. If we find those images satisfactory, it is fine. Otherwise, breast MRI with MRI would be what would be indicated. And of course, then we need to do a pathological diagnosis by doing either a fine needle aspiration cytology or core biopsy. The choice of, I think that's the next question that you want to ask.
So yeah, you can go ahead with that question. So the next question I can ask Dr. Vijay. You can talk about the true cut biopsy versus FNAC.
Yes. So FNAC and true cut biopsy are two modalities. FNAC is a little cheaper and we get the diagnosis much faster. But we need to be understanding that FNAC, as the name suggests, it is fine needle aspiration cytology. A very fine needle is used and only few cells can be withdrawn from the tumor. So it is only a cytology. So very often diagnosis can be missed. So a negative FNAC does not rule out malignancy is what we really need to understand. True cut biopsy is a very simple biopsy which is done under local anesthesia, wherein we use either a 18 gauge or a 16 gauge needle. It is a little thicker tissue that we get, and histopathological test is done on this. So the diagnosis is better, and also true cut biopsy has a benefit. If it does turn out to be malignant, then we can do what are called as immunohistochemistry markers, that is the ER, PR, HER2 KI67. These are the markers which are very important to understand if it is malignancy, because we can plan the treatment accordingly. Hence, the modality of preference is true cut biopsy in our department for sure, and that is what I would recommend.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jayanti, for that comprehensive answer. The next question I would like
Dr.
to
Vishwanath, I would like to add.
Yeah, please go
Dr.
ahead.
Vishwanath,
Yeah.
I would like to add a comment on this true cut biopsy versus FNAC. I agree with Dr. Jayanti that true cut biopsy is a better option because cellularity and architecture is preserved for better IHC and histopathology. But at the same time, if you have a good expertise who can do the FNAC and prepare a proper cellular blocks with FNAC, the yield is important here, and IHC is equivalent in both the true cut biopsy as well as FNAC.
Okay.
Just a word of caution. I agree with Dr. Vijay when he says this, but the thing is, we have seen a lot of doctors who have just been, because the FNAC is negative, they have let go of it, and valuable time is lost very often. And this is very, very common in our country. And like he emphasized, there needs to be more expertise in
Exactly, that's what I mentioned.
As compared to true cut biopsy.
Yeah, so point well taken from both of you. So I would like to go to Dr. Vijay Bhaskar. So when it comes to here, we are dealing with the T2N0M0s, clinically at least. So here, when it comes to imaging, would you go ahead with the chest X-ray and ultrasound, or would you go ahead with the PET-CT? Dr. Vijay Bhaskar.
Looking at the stage of the disease, it is T2N0 clinically.
Yes.
So PET-CT, because of the age of the patient, I would go with with a PET-CT. Otherwise, it is ultrasound, mammogram, and chest X-ray.
Okay. So, Dr. Jayanti, any difference of opinion here?
No, I agree with him. Unless it is a stage 3 disease clinically, we do not do a PET-CT scan as a routine. Ultrasound of abdomen, pelvis, X-ray chest, and LFT suffices. But in this case, yes, we did a PET-CT scan because considering her age. And yeah, that's the reason why we did a PET.
So like Dr. Jayanti mentioned, there was uptake only in the right breast and the right axillary lymph node. In fact, there was a little uptake, but no distant metastasis. Now I will go on to the next question with Dr. Jayanti. So whenever there is a breast lump, there are always two ways of going about it. So you can go ahead with the breast conservative surgery or a modified radical mastectomy. In this particular patient, what would you do?
Yeah, since a young patient, there are things to be considered. One thing is, in younger patient, cosmesis plays a bigger role. But also in a young patient, if she's BRCA positive, then again the scenario becomes different. But in this case, when upfront we have to decide about surgery, breast conservation surgery is what is the treatment of choice, since it is a unicentric disease. Had it been multicentric disease, then of course there was no indication for breast conservation surgery, since it is a unicentric disease. And what is more important is tumor to breast ratio. Only the size of the tumor is not the only marker. How big is the size of the breast, and what is the ratio between tumor and the breast tissue is important. In her case, yes, we could do a breast conservation surgery since the size of the lump is quite small.
Dr. Jayanti, briefly, can you please, for the benefit of our fellow physicians, can you please talk about sentinel lymph node biopsy very briefly?
Yeah. Before I go to sentinel lymph node biopsy, we should remember that whenever breast conservation surgery is planned, radiation therapy is a must. There is no option of not taking radiation therapy. And this has to be completely understood by the patient before we plan. If there is some hesitation, either it may be the cost factor or distance, or it may just not be, a radiation may not be accessible. In such cases, it would be wiser to do a modified radical mastectomy and not breast conservation surgery. But otherwise, breast conservation surgery with radiation therapy is as safe as doing a mastectomy. Doing a mastectomy has no advantage than doing a conservation surgery. Well, talking about the sentinel lymph node biopsy, when clinically the lymph nodes in the axilla are not palpable and radiologically also when they do not look suspicious, then sentinel lymph node biopsy can be done. Now, earlier days when we were students, we were doing axillary lymph node clearance for all the patients, but it has its own issues. Axillary lymph node dissection can cause lymphedema, it can cause paresthesia, it can cause shoulder discomfort, and there are certain discomforts that can be seen in at least 16% of patients. Now, if there's an early disease, very often doing such a radical surgery for axilla is not needed. Hence, a sentinel lymph node biopsy is planned, wherein we inject a dye which is methylene blue and a technetium dye is injected, and the lymph node which is picked up by the gamma probe, or in some cases where nuclear medicine department is not there, when we inject a methylene blue, the node which is stained blue in color because of the dye is one. We normally in our department we remove 3 lymph nodes and we send it for frozen section. So these are the lymph nodes which are the first draining lymph node of the breast. So we send it for frozen section. If the frozen section report suggests that the lymph node is not involved or it is not metastatic, then we can assume that the rest of the lymph nodes in the axilla are free, and we need not subject the patient to complete axillary clearance and all the issues following that. So, but if in some cases where frozen section facility may not be there, in those cases, doing axillary clearance would be wise. But sentinel lymph node biopsy has really is the gold standard for patients with early disease and where axilla is clinically clear and radiologically not suspicious.
Thank you, Dr. Jayanti, for that wonderful explanation. I would like to go to Dr. Vijay Bhaskar now. So we have this is a premenopausal lady. So there are ways of doing this oophorectomy. I mean, so ovarian ablation. It could be it could be through chemical, through drugs, or it could be through radiation, or it could be through surgery. Dr. Vijay Bhaskar, would you go ahead and kind of to suppress her ovarian function? What would you do in this particular case?
Medical line of treatment, because there's no added benefit with surgical oophorectomy when compared to medical ablation.
Pardon me?
There is no added benefit with surgical oophorectomy.
Okay.
When compared to medical ablation.
But I think both the panelists would agree that we will have to go ahead with some form of ovarian suppression in this patient.
In case she is ERPR positive, which she was in this case.
Yes, case. Yes.
Yes, yeah.
So now, like Dr. Jayanti mentioned, yes, this was ERPR positive and HER2 negative, and the Ki67 was 15 to 20%, and the post-op histopathology showed PT2N0M0, and we also went ahead and did a BRCA testing in her, and it came positive. So, any comments on that, Dr. Jayanti?
Yeah, so it is BRCA positive, but right now we would focus on the current disease and deal with the BRCA positivity later on. Now, this patient, though she is T2N0, she has certain factors which are not in her favor. And those are the tumor being grade 3 and Ki67 index being high. And yeah, these are the factors which go against her favor. Had these been also in her favor, had Ki67 index been less and the tumor had been grade 1 or grade 2, and also her age, she is very young age. So we decided to give her chemotherapy in this case. But had the scenario been different, had it been a little older patient, then we could have done the other genomic markers, which are like Oncotype DX or MammaPrint or CanAssist Breast. There are many options available which we could have done. But in this case, since she was young and grade 3 disease and Ki67 was high, we chose to give her chemotherapy.
Yeah, perfect. So, of course, Dr. Jayanti has also answered about the role of chemotherapy in this patient. So this patient underwent a breast conservative surgery. So Dr. Vijay Bhaskar, can you mention a few points about what dose you would give and what would be the type of radiation you would give to this particular patient?
So as she is luminal A, that is T2, N0, and grade 3, and age being 37 years, and although she's ERPR strongly positive, we would not go with accelerated partial breast irradiation, that is popularly called as APBR. We would go with a whole breast irradiation with hyperfractionated schedule.
Perfect. So, Dr. Jayanti, this will be the last question. So I just want to know about, yes, this patient has undergone surgery, has undergone chemotherapy, the radiation is over. Now the entire treatment plan is done. So now how would you do surveillance for this patient?
Yeah, so she will be put on tamoxifen, and now there are studies which have shown that tamoxifen for 10 years gives better results than tamoxifen for 5 years, which was given earlier. And since she is BRCA positive, she would be given an option. Of course, genetic counseling would be very important with a geneticist, and that would be done for her. And she would be having an option of going through bilateral prophylactic mastectomy and prophylactic salpingo-oophorectomy, or a strict surveillance, that is 6 monthly clinical breast examination and yearly either a mammogram or breast MRI. And of course, monthly self-examination, breast self-examination is what we would recommend to her.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that summarizes everything about this particular patient. Thank you so much, Dr. Jayanti and Dr. Vijay Bhaskar, for being here. And we definitely nowadays, I think Dr. Jayanti and Dr. Vijay Bhaskar would agree that there's a major shift in the by a decade. So we are seeing patients coming younger, at least mainly in the late 30s and early 40s. We are seeing a lot of patients with the breast cancer, and I think it's very important to also, like Dr. Jayanti said, screening is very important, and even the patients who are treated, surveillance is very important. Thank you so much.
Dr. Vishwanath, I just want to ask a question.
Yeah, please.
Regarding this androgen receptor positivity. So I did see this in the histopathology. What is the significance of that AR positivity now?
Dr. Jayanti, would you like to take this question?
Yeah, in case the patient relapses sometime, we may have some option, is what was in the idea. And I routinely get it done because it is done in our hospital, one thing. And yeah, I routinely do it. Yeah.
And no, ma'am, now the significance.
Actually, no data from Indian patients about AR in breast cancer. And I think that if we start doing, and when usage of the androgen comes into play, then we will have some data from India.
As AR receptor has only a role as a prognostic factor, because most of the ER positive breast cancers, it is 90% of the times it is positive. Yeah. It only gives you a prognostic indicator, but in the management as such, there's no role.
Dr. Vishwanath, do you want to say something on that?
Yeah, Dr. Jayanti mentioned, in a triple negative breast cancer in the metastatic setting, there is role for androgen receptor blockers like enzalutamide. In fact, we have a few patients on enzalutamide in the metastatic setting.
No, we are talking about ER receptor positive breast cancer.
Yeah, ER receptor positive breast cancer. Apparently, it is also prognostic. They say that ER receptor positivity has got a better prognosis compared to ER negativity. But
yeah, 90% of the patients do express AR positivity.
Exactly. Yeah, but but yes, there's no treatment implication in the adjuvant setting. I do agree with that.
True.
Thank you, Dr. Jayanti and Dr. Vijay Bhaskar, for being
part of the
panel.
Thank you very much.
So let's go on to the next case, and we have our expert panelists. Dr. Satish Nar, are you there? He's not there. Okay, we'll have Dr. Anil Kamath and Dr. Beliappa to take questions on this head and neck cancer. Dr. Anil Kamath is a senior surgical oncologist at Apollo Hospitals, Bangalore. And Dr. Beliappa is one of the senior most radiation oncologists in Bangalore. And he's also part of Apollo Hospitals, Banagatta Road. Welcome, Dr. Beliappa and Dr. Anil Kamath.
Hello.
Yeah,
Thank you.
So today, incidentally, it is World Head and Neck Cancer Day. July 27th is actually observed as World Head and Neck Cancer Day. And we have got head and neck, two eminent oncologists will be answering our questions on head and neck cancer. So of course, the risk factors are mainly tobacco, age, alcohol, and certain HP viruses like Epstein-Barr virus and human papilloma virus. So we'll start off with this case. So here is a 57-year-old gentleman who presented with right neck swelling and dysphagia of 3 months duration. This is actually a real-time case we treated in 2017. So what are the differential diagnoses? I would like to start with Dr. Anil Kamath. So in a patient like this, what is the differential diagnosis you would think of?
Yes. So any dysphagia has to be taken seriously, especially if it is in an elderly male. So this 57 years dysphagia definitely to be taken seriously, and along with the right neck swelling, very high chance that we are dealing with cancer. So any dysphagia, the test that we do is an endoscopy. So yes, so it will help us evaluate the esophagus. And of course, then following endoscopy, we would like to see if there is any lesion. If so, we will have to take a biopsy. So that is the first part. The next part is an imaging. Probably I would get a CT scan or a PET scan, depending on this one. And last thing, we can get a FNAC of the lymph node.
Yeah. So like Dr. Anil Kamath mentioned, this patient underwent a FNAC of the cervical lymph node, which turned out to be a squamous cell carcinoma. And this patient also underwent, again, MRI versus PET CT. There is always, if you want to look at the chest, there is always that debate that it's better to get a CT chest or you can get a whole body PET CT versus MRI neck. What would you do, Dr. Beliappa, sir?
Actually, both has got a role to play.
Yeah, definitely.
Because,
like you said, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
because especially in the tongue malignancy, we know know the depth. It's very good to have a MRI than a PET CT. For a lymph nodal metastasis, maybe a PET scan will be a better tool to have. So both has got a different role to play, and both are very important. We have a complementary MRI along with PET CT is what I advise many times.
Yes, sir, definitely. So I totally take that point that it is complementary to each other. So now here we did the PET CT, which showed a hypermetabolic irregular thickening of the right side of the oropharynx involving the tonsillar fossa, right vallecula. And there was a large lymph node. It was actually 6 centimeters cervical lymph node in the largest dimension. So any additional investigations? This, I think Dr. Anil Kamath has covered about the scopy. And we got a biopsy of the tonsillar mass also, which turned out to be squamous cell carcinoma. Now, this is the latest staging of the oropharyngeal head and neck cancer. I just want to, so this patient turned out to be a CT3, N3 because patient has got such a large lymph node. And my question to Dr. Beliappa, sir, would the staging change if the patient has got HPV positivity?
HPV positive staging may not change, but actually the prognosis changes. The outcome, like HPV positive patient, they do much better than HPV negative patients.
Yes, definitely. Like sir mentioned, the prognosis is much better as compared to HPV negative patient. Now, this patient, like you said, do you do in your regular practice, Dr. Anil Kamath?
Yes, I think now with this one, oropharyngeal cancers, it's a must. It's this one, because not only this one, the prognosis, there is some thought that HPV positive patients require less aggressive treatment as compared to HPV negative patients. Yeah, so it will have a treatment implication also. So I think I would consider it a must. If you are following standard practice, it is a must.
So, like Dr. Anil Kamath said, we are actually doing HPV testing by immunohistochemistry, which is a simple test, and we do this something called P16. And like Dr. Beliappa mentioned, HPV positive patients have got a better prognosis. Now, me being a medical oncologist, this patient actually we treated, and in discussion with Dr. Beliappa, and the surgical oncologist. In fact, we went ahead with some chemotherapy, which I think all the expert panelists would also agree, because the lymph node was very large and the radiation field would be huge. So after 3 cycles, the patient underwent had a good response to treatment and subsequently underwent a concurrent chemo radiation. So, Dr. Beliappa, would you like to comment about the radiation and what was the field of radiation and what is the dose you would give in this particular patient?
See, there are different techniques we use for radiation in head and neck malignancy. This is the one side, head and neck malignancy is the one area where IMRT has shown better result, because mainly in preserving the parotid glands and avoiding stomatitis and late complications. So this is the one area compared to most of the other pelvic or other areas. IMRT is the standard guideline for for head and neck malignancy to treat with. So usually we give for squamous cell carcinoma, we give around say 7,000 centigrade and 35 fractions. This is a standard guideline which has been practiced all over the world. In HPV positive cases, sometimes we give around say 85% of the dose what is recommended, but 66 gray is good enough to have a good control of the tumor.
Yeah. So like Dr. Beliappa mentioned, I think there is some role for de-escalation of radiation in case of HPV positive patients. And he has also very nicely summarized the latest modalities of radiation therapy, which also causes less toxicity to the normal tissue. So this patient actually underwent a follow-up PET-CT and had a complete response. But 1.5 years later, the patient presented with dysphagia. Dr. Beliappa, again, how would you investigate this patient? Definitely an imaging. What imaging would you do here?
See, one of the thing is field cancellation. If he was a tobacco chewer, we want to make sure there is a recurrence or different area in the oropharynx or esophageal region, like in a second malignancy is cropped up. So I would like to do a PET scan, then just a localized CT scan. So I will go for a PET CT scan.
Yeah, the PET CT actually showed a lymph node in the parapharyngeal. It showed a mass in the parapharyngeal region and also a small lymph node in the mediastinal region. So we went ahead and also investigated with the endobronchial ultrasound guided biopsy of the mediastinal lymph node, and that turned out to be actually tuberculosis. So we ended up having only that parapharyngeal mass. So in this kind of situation, Dr. Anil Kamath, I know oropharyngeal malignancies, the surgeries upfront are very mutilating.
Yes.
But in case if the patient does not respond to CTRT totally, or if the patient has got an isolated recurrence, is there any role for surgery in these kind of patients?
It has to be purely individualized, because oropharyngeal surgeries tend to be very morbid. So I would see the general condition of the patient and whether I will be able to achieve a complete clearance. And the morbidity of the surgery has to be discussed with the patient. If it is amenable to surgery, in discussion with the patient, and the patient is fit and the organ can be reconstructed, there is a definite role for salvage surgery.
Sure. So I think this summarizes this case. And any other thoughts, Dr. Beliappa, on World Head and Neck Cancer Day? You would like to add some thoughts, a few points about our fellow physicians? This will be circulated amongst all our primary physicians.
What I like to say is tobacco and cancer are made for each other. People who smoke or chew tobacco, there is a high incidence of cancer in head and neck region. So that's one thing which I think all of us, not only after the treatment, also they should quit tobacco. Otherwise, the chance of coming back, the disease coming back is very high. And second is first line treatment is always the best, because most of the head and neck malignancies are above the clavicle only. So if you treat properly with radically multimodality treatment, we should be able to get a cure rate. And if it recurs, to get back to the mainstream is very difficult. So I always tell my patients, even though it's expensive, the first treatment is the best treatment. Go for the best and don't compromise in the treatment. Thank you, Dr. Vishnu.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for being there, and thank you, Dr. Anil Kamath and Dr. Beliappa, sir. So we move on to the next one, will be on gastric cancer. So we'll have Dr. Anil Kamath again, senior surgical oncologist from Apollo, and Dr. Vijay Bhaskar, if he's around, or Dr. Belepa can join us. So here we have.
Yeah.
Vijay Bhaskar, sir, you're there?
I'm with you, Vishwanath.
Okay, sure. So
Yeah, I'm with you, Dr. Vishwanath.
Thank you. So here we have a 59-year-old male with who presented with epigastric pain and upper GI scopy or esophagogastroscopy showed actually an ulcerated lesion in the gastroesophageal junction, and the biopsy turned out to be poorly differentiated carcinoma. Dr. Anil Kamath, I would like to start with you. How would you proceed with this? This has come from basically a gastroenterologist has seen, and he has referred this patient to you. How would you go
Yeah.
about it?
The next step would be staging. So as with the other cases, a PET scan would be the best modality to evaluate the spread. One is the local spread to the lymph nodes, and other is the distant spread. Other investigations I would do based on the situation, but next would be staging investigations, preferably a PET.
Okay.
So in a very early case, some other investigation like endoscopic ultrasound might be required to see the depth of infiltration. But in this case, I think the investigation of choice would be a PET scan.
So this patient actually underwent a PET scan, which showed a FDG avid gastroesophageal junction mass, cardia and body of the stomach. And there were also multiple perigastric lymph nodes, celiac lymph nodes, and paraesophageal lymph nodes. Now, my question again to Dr. Kamath: when would you when to suspect gastric CA? This is again, because our physicians, our primary care physicians would definitely want to know this in regular practice. What are the main symptoms which patients come with?
Yes, any unexplained anemia or unexplained weight loss, it would be better to do an endoscopy. Many patients, elderly patients, classic hematemesis, they do present, but not very often. Iron deficiency anemia, especially if the physicians are seeing iron deficiency anemia in an elderly male, I think an endoscopy has got a chance that it will pick up this one. We can even do a stool occult blood to see if the patient is losing blood somewhere. So these are the varying ways. Gastric cancer, of course, it is difficult to detect early. So we need to sensitize our physicians and the patients directly that whenever they have any symptoms like prolonged acidity or like I said, unexplained weight loss or anemia, they should get investigated. So only when you are proactive and you investigate, you will detect at an early stage. Otherwise, most gastric cancers come quite late.
Yeah, the age-old saying of anemia, asthenia, and anorexia, that the 3 A's is very important.
Yes, it holds good here.
Yeah. So, so Dr. Vijay Bhaskar, so what is the importance of IHC, and have you also come across other histologies like neuroendocrine tumors or lymphomas presenting in this way?
Yes, sir. IHC is very important because your line of management changes. If it's a lymphoma, it's a primary chemotherapy. Then again, neuroendocrine, your line of management changes for, say, the drugs or the surgical approach. So hence IHC is important.
Sure. So Dr. Anil Kamath, again, back to you. Say in 100 cases of gastric cancer, which you see in your practice, what percentage of patients are operable and how many are inoperable upfront, and you refer to a medical oncologist for some chemotherapy before you take up for surgery?
Yes, that will depend on the timeline. Probably my answer would have been different about 10 years back. But now we are seeing more and more in a technically operable stage. Earlier, most gastric cancers we used to see would be advanced. But now we are seeing more in a relatively earlier stage because of more awareness, more availability of endoscopy. Yeah, in the past few years, even from my own MCH training, I would tell the role of chemotherapy has improved quite a bit. So nowadays the standard teaching is anything which is T3 or node positive. If your imaging shows that it has infiltrated across the muscularis propria, or you are seeing positive appearing nodes, then some form of chemotherapy is preferable before surgery then the actual call has to be taken looking at the patient, whether he is obstructed, whether he can tolerate chemotherapy, such other things. But I would refer to a medical oncologist anytime it shows a locally advanced, which is T3 or node positive.
Yeah, thank
So
you.
that thing has changed over the past few years, I think, where there is a definite role now for neoadjuvant chemotherapy.
Yes, this patient, like Dr. Anil Kamath mentioned, had multiple nodes. It had spread to the lymph nodes. So definitely it was a more than a T3 lesion. So this patient was referred to the medical oncologist, and the medical oncologist gave some chemotherapy, 4 cycles of chemotherapy. In fact, I was the medical oncologist. So, and then subsequently the patient had good response to treatment. Now this patient underwent a surgery after that. And the post-op histopathology turned out to be a T2N1 disease. So I would like to ask Dr. Anil Kamath to mention briefly about what is this D2 dissection and what kind of surgery is generally done for gastric cancer. Please be brief.
Yes, yes. See, the one is the treatment of the primary, which you can either do a partial gastrectomy or a total gastrectomy. Basically, if you can get good margins, you can go for a partial gastrectomy. And depending on the location, it can be proximal, distal, subtotal, total, where it is located. That is one thing. There has been a lot of controversy regarding lymph node dissection. If you remove only the lymph nodes in and around the stomach, it is called, or the perigastric lymph nodes, it is called T1 dissection. If you go beyond that to the origin of the blood vessel, which is usually the left gastric or celiac or the splenic, that is, you are going beyond the lymph nodes around the stomach to the origin, that is called D2. Nowadays, we hear of D3 also, where you go much beyond to aorta and other this thing. But by and large, this is this one. So whenever we qualify gastrectomy, we qualify on what type of surgery has been done for the stomach and how much, to what extent the lymph nodes are removed, whether it is D1 or D2, and whether it's a partial or a total gastrectomy.
Okay, thank you. So, Dr. Vijay Bhaskar, yes, this patient underwent some neoadjuvant chemotherapy, that is chemotherapy before surgery, and then after surgery also underwent some chemo. But in your practice, when would you consider radiation along with chemotherapy? So some kind of chemo radiation after surgery in the adjuvant setting. Is there any role?
In this case, assuming the number of lymph nodes removed being adequate, and it's a T2 lesion, if this was a scenario for us, based on the surgical margins and the lymph node dissected, we would say no radiation for this. But if there's a positive margin and lymph node positivity, we would suggest chemoradiation, adjuvant.
So what is the dose and how do you go about this? What radiation technique do you use?
The dose would be 45 gray in 25 fractions.
Okay.
So it's going to be conventional fractionation schedule.
Okay. And we generally give capecitabine along with cisplatin is what the chemotherapy regimen along with radiation is what is given. So yes, definitely there have been a lot of studies where chemotherapy has been compared to chemoradiation, more or less equivalent results with both the combination of chemoradiation and chemotherapy. But like Dr. Vijay Bhaskar mentioned, certain specific indications like positive margins would definitely go for some kind of radiation along with chemo. Yeah. So Dr. Kamath, I would like you to kind of close this case with the post-operative care. Generally, what would you suggest and how would you ask the patient to come for surveillance?
Post-operative care, of course, one thing which we can never ignore in stomach cancer is nutrition. So these patients would be nutritionally depleted, and this one. So the care will continue post-operatively, and gastrectomy has got its own complications in terms of nutrition. So it's normal to place some sort of a feeding tube after gastric resections. So that continues in the post-operative period also, especially if the patient is nutritionally depleted. That management through jejunoscopy would be quite important in the post-operative period also. So once they complete treatment, the next thing is the follow-up. And here we would advise them regular follow-up once in 3 months. So we do a regular investigations like ultrasound or endoscopy as and when it's required, and sometimes a PET scan.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Anil Kamath and Dr. Vijay Bhaskar. I would like to thank all my panelists. So I am Dr. Vishwanath. I'm a medical oncologist with Apollo Hospitals, Bangalore. I had the pleasure of moderating with my expert panelists. So thank you, Dr. Vijay Bhaskar, Dr. Jayanti Tumsi, Dr. Anil Kamath, and Dr. Beliappa. It was wonderful having all of you. And it was a good virtual CME experience, and I hope it reaches all our fellow physicians, and we are always there to help any patient who is in need of any care at Apollo Cancer Centers, Bangalore. And please feel free to reach out to any of us for discussion and taking it forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you.